Right, guys. What we're looking at, consequences of civil war. Right, such an important one. We need to know this inside out. Right, a little run through of what caused it. You're looking at the seven southern states that set up their own confederacy. Remember the start date, 1861. You need to know that's important because it connects to so many other things. There'd been a big argument. It was about slavery. A bit of a misconception that slavery was very secondary. It was all about control. It was all about in terms of who had the power. Northern states, yeah, it is true, they wanted to stop the use of slavery, I guess, but yeah, there you go. Don't worry too much about the causes. It does have an impact of the freed slaves later on. What happened as the event? Well, Union armies had about 2 million, Confederates 800. Robert Lee was a great general from the South. 200,000 were killed in battle, lots died of disease, a lot of land and crops were destroyed. This will lead to the Reconstruction. This is important though. Troops from the West were brought in and replaced in the West by volunteer militias, which would have an impact on Native Americans, specifically people like Little Crow, remember. War ends on the 9th of April 1865 when Lee meets Ulysses Grant and surrenders. Reconstruction starts to begin. Okay, now this is important. It's all about what happened as a result. So slavery was ended and citizenship granted to the former slaves. This was important because later on we'll come back to it, the Exoduster movement. So it's a big migratory factor, isn't it? Because the Exoduster comes from the biblical Exodus, where the ex-slaves they move west. Many people do start moving west, which made it easier the government to pass laws. Right, so this is key here. When the Confederate States leave the Union's able to pass the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railroad Act. They're able to pass it without that conflict. In addition, not all soldiers wanted to return to civilian life. Some would go west to find opportunity to make money. Some led to lawlessness. And also, they would join in the fights against Native Americans. Right, so it's a big impact on developing the West, isn't it? Because it does lead to these two big laws that are brought out. The government then wants people to move westwards for a variety of reasons. They want to keep control of territories. They won from Mexico and France as well. They won New Orleans. They get Florida and stuff from the Spanish. They want to enable them to fulfill manifest destiny as well. Remember that whole term, the idea of controlling and populating the West. So the government, this is key for things about the Homestead Act. The government offered parcels of 640 acres of land for sale at $1 an acre. However, only rich people would buy up the land and then sold it on for a high price to those who couldn't afford it. But also, that was a little bit too expensive for your average person anyway. Who had $648, in the back pocket in those times? Not many. So it changes. Now, the Desert Land Act, don't worry too much about, but I'm going to talk about the first two. Now, the Homestead Act, we should all know this inside out. So what I said before, that $640 was too expensive for most ordinary families. The Homestead Act fixed this, basically plots out 160 acres, which means it's enough for a family house and enough to support the family. So these became the homesteaders. It costs just $10 to register the claim, so make a note of that. And they call it filing for a claim. The US government, they did not want all the land in the West to be bought up by the rich. It wanted to encourage the settlement of the West for lots of individual farmers. Thousands of small farmers are all paying property taxes, would give a big boost to the economy. So they had good reasons for this. Anyone could file a claim, as long as they're head of the family or single and over 21. This meant ex-slaves and single women could file claims. Anyone intending to become a US citizen, they could file a claim, but American Indians couldn't. Anyone filing a claim had to live on the land and work the land themselves. There were limits on how many claims one person could take up. The government, again, wanted to present businessmen just monopolizing it. One someone had lived on the land for 5 years, built a house, and planted 5 acres of crops, they could pay $30 and own their homestead outright. So proving up $30. Remember, we can shorten this down, guys. 160 acres, $10 a clear, and $30 to prove up. We need to get those in our head. What was significant? Well, by 1876, 6 million of acres of government land had become available for homesteaders, or had successfully become homestead. Sorry. The Homestead Act made sure the Great Plains were settled for the first time. 80 million acres of public land were settled as a direct consequence. Its biggest success was Nebraska. Nearly half of all settled land here was homestead land. Their population growth resulted in it becoming a state in 1867. So Nebraska is a great bit of evidence to bulk up the success of the Homestead Act. Problem was, though, only 13 million acres of claims have been proved up by 1884. 24 million acres by 1900. Although 80 million acres was eventually homesteaded, this was out of a total of 500 million, so there was still a lot left. The government granted far more land to the railroads. The railroads got a lot of this land, 300 million acres they got, and then they sold off the rest for higher prices, often to kind of like cattle ranchers. Many more homesteaders were formed by people buying land from the railroad companies. The 60% of homestead claims were never proved up, often because of the problems of farming on the plains. What else we got? So despite the government's intention that the Homestead Act would produce lots of individual family farms, rich landowners were still able to basically use it to get land really cheaply. Big ranchers would make all their employees file a claim and then just get them to hand over the rights. The Homestead Act also allowed people to buy their claim for $1.25 per acre once they had plowed 1 acre of it and lived there for 6 months. As a result, many people filed claims in order to sell it on at a profit. The consequence was the family that ended up farming the land had usually paid someone for it rather than proving it up for the Homestead Act. So there were issues. Then we've got the Timber Culture Act. Remember, the Timber Culture Act is kind of like doing what the Homestead Act didn't. So as a homesteader, you could get claimant of 160 acres of land with a promise to basically plant a quarter of it with trees. This was important because the trees would provide timber for the homestead, it would provide fuel, and also provided a windbreak for the crops. And the aim was basically to reduce the high rates of failed homesteaders. But again, a big problem was the rich would kind of gobble it all up. But anyway, they're the main two acts. So again, please check it out, and yeah, that will keep you till next time.